Okay, so can we talk about the idea that humans are so afraid of being rejected? Coming from Aaliyah Renee, who's a girly pop, who genuinely lived for the acceptance of others, whether that be in social settings, in romantic pursuits of relationships. Like, these were thoughts that would circulate in my mind all the time. And I think for most humans, we have all been put in these situations throughout our lives where it's almost like two sides of the coin, where you're either going to be accepted or rejected in some sort of capacity. Think back to you like being on the playground, okay? And you are new to the school, maybe everyone's new to the school, and you're starting to form these friend groups or little cliques. Even like when you're younger, you kind of find people that sort of gravitate towards each other, like in the kid dynamic of things. That was like the first introduction, I think, for most of us to this idea of being accepted. You're putting yourself out there, you're saying, hi, my name is Aaliyah, like me. Whenever you are met with the opposite of acceptance or what you were expecting, it then leads you to almost have this adverse reaction to rejection. We've been trained as humans to believe that if you've been rejected, you should be sad. If you don't get the job, you should be sad. If you don't get the guy or the girl that you've been pursuing, that is a bad thing. Go cry about it. I think it's natural to have human emotions. Like, for sure, if you're invested in something, you can definitely feel sad when what you've invested in does not come to fruition. Sometimes it can be a little bit negative when we have such a fear of rejection that it may stop us from pursuing things, or almost like make us angry at the world or angry at God when rejection does happen to us. Because I think every human deep down inside wishes to be liked and accepted by those around them. Because of this, we develop this fear of rejection. We're so invested in being accepted by others, whether that be getting the job, getting the girl, getting the guy, getting the apartment, getting into the college, making those friends. When we are let down, when we do not feel accepted or have that approval of man, we tend to spiral in this idea of rejection. And I also think that we as humans tend to be super emotional. I am also a very emotional human. Hello. Sometimes I will hear of a situation or an opportunity arising, and then I'll put all my eggs in that basket, moving out of emotion. And sometimes we don't even take a second to think or even ask God if like this is his will for us. And in a moment's notice, when we are introduced to new people, new opportunities, we invest so much into them that when we do get rejected, we've made these small things that really probably don't have that much impact on our lives into much greater things. And once we are rejected from those things, it has much of a bigger impact than it should have. All because we're moving in like this delusional apocalypse. Like, shout out to all my Delulu people. Stand up if you're Delulu, if you claim delusion. And then sit right back down. Because that's a problem. We're romanticizing the idea of not being rational people. We're romanticizing being delusional. Delusion is literally like you're not thinking straight and you're not processing things correctly. And we're like, yes, I'm Delulu, I'm delusional. But that is contrary to what God wants for us and what his will is for us. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear or a spirit of delusion, but power and love and a sound mind. What does a sound mind mean? A sound mind means the idea of being self-controlled, self-disciplined, having good judgment and sound judgment, which is the opposite of being delusional. So already this idea of being delusional and looking at every situation and not taking it to the Lord in prayer and then being disappointed when we don't get those things because we just didn't ask God in the first place is the root of this fear of rejection. Because some of the things that we're so invested in were never meant for us in the first place. But because we move in the Luluville, we don't ask the Lord for what his will is for our lives. We invest so much into things that were never meant for us in the first place. So when the Lord is like, oh no, that's not right. And then he just simply is like, you don't get the apartment. The guy doesn't like you back. We're like, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. Like, there's something wrong with me. I must be ugly and broke and poor because these people don't like me or I didn't get the job. But in reality, it's just God being like, no, that's not for you. I have something greater. I want to look up what rejection actually meant. I'm a girl. I love my definitions. And the dictionary refers to rejection as this idea of us refusing to agree, refusing to admit, believe, or receive, or refusing to accept someone or consider someone for things like a job application, romantic relationships. But that feels like such a convoluted definition. In terms of my definition of what rejection is, it's the act of being denied a desire you want. It's the act of being let down after investing emotions and setting expectations for something. So this idea that we've almost been on a roller coaster, like where we start off at the bottom, we hear about an opportunity at the top. So we go up this roller coaster, we see this opportunity, or this cute guy has followed us on Instagram, and we're like, oh, this is my husband. And then he unfollows you, and you plummet down to the depths of the earth because you've been rejected. And this tends to be a roller coaster that a lot of us live, because when we are at the bottom and we see an opportunity, we don't actually ask God before we invest into opportunity. So we go on this roller coaster all the way to the tippy top, and God is like, no, girl, if you start dating that guy, your life is going to be flipped upside down 180 degrees. And I cannot let that happen to you. The guy unfollows you because it's not in your will, and you just drop down in the roller coaster, and you get really, really sad. You get mad at yourself. You ask what's wrong with you, but then you're also almost mad at God. Now, all of a sudden, sometimes when we go through rejection, like beforehand, when we're up on that roller coaster, we're not even talking to God. We're not saying, oh, God, is this your will, as we go up? But as soon as we crash down, as soon as we feel rejection, we're like, God, why would you do this to me? There has to be a constant communication there so that God is able to reveal to you if this is right or this is wrong, so that you're not investing so much prematurely and then getting let down in the end. So what is rejection in the Bible? One of the greatest stories of rejection is the story of Joseph, which can be found in Genesis chapter 37 to 50. Just to give you the SparkSmokes version and to show you how rejection can be God's redirection for you, because he's like, no, that's not your purpose. That's not your path. I have something greater. Joseph was born into a family of a bunch of brothers, okay? And it seems like when you read his story, he most desperately wanted to be accepted to his brothers. Every single time, continuously, the brothers would despise Joseph. He was his father's favorite, but he was just not accepted of his brothers. He was experiencing rejection from his family, which honestly is some of the deepest types of rejection that you can experience. Being rejected that by the people who share your DNA, who you've grown up with since the moment you were born, is a different type of hurt. And in a really drastic and dramatic turn of events, his brothers actually performed the ultimate form of rejection. These people did not want to see him. They rejected him so much. They're like, we don't even want to see you in the same house as us. We're going to sell you into slavery. We want nothing to do with you. And the story of Joseph is really great, and I think you should definitely read it. Okay, so we can kind of see what happens to him as he is a slave, and how he then, if we fast forward, ends up becoming the second hand to the king. So he went from being rejected by his family, but God's redirection leads him into a great position of power. And then all of a sudden, a great famine falls upon the land. So Joseph is now in this position of power, and it's his responsibility to basically give food to everyone so that they can survive in the famine. It was just his job for people to come to him and be like, hey, we need food because, as you know, it's a famine. And he will be like, yeah, girl, I got you. Here, take your rations for the week. The brothers are now in this position where they're in dire need of food. They go up to get these rations, and they actually at first don't recognize that it's Joseph, since it's been so long and now he's literally the second hand of the king. They honestly thought when they sold him into slavery that would be it. He's basically as good as dead to them. And then the brothers come to the realization after a bunch of other events that is like, wait a second, this guy who's secondhand to the king is the same brother that we rejected and sold away from our family because we didn't like him. They were so scared that Joseph was going to retaliate because of that pain of rejection that they thought he would have, because they basically exiled him from the family. And we can see this in Genesis chapter 50, verse 15 and verse 18 to 21. This is sort of like the end of this history of Joseph, when the brothers come to the realization that this is Joseph, and they're scared out of their mind because they fear that the rejection that they did to him would come back to bite them in the butt, because Joseph would be like, yeah, you rejected me. I hate you now. You're not going to get food. I'm going to kill you because I'm secondhand to the king and I have more power than you ever will. So let's start at verse 15. It says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? In verse 18, it says, his brothers were so afraid, they threw themselves down before Joseph, and they said to him, we're your slaves. So the same brothers who had rejected him and sold him into slavery are now, it's like 180. They are now saying to him the the same brother they rejected and sold as a slave, that they were his slaves now because they were so afraid. But watch how Joseph responds. Watch how Joseph, because of his wisdom and how connected he was with God, was able to recognize that the rejection of his family was actually for the greater purpose of himself. It says in verse 19, but Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I the place of God? In verse 20, it says, you intended to harm me. That rejection that you did, the way that you sold me into slavery, you intended to harm me with it. But God intended that rejection for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph was able to recognize that the rejection that was intended for his harm, when people reject you or hurt you and they intend harm for you, or even in situations where no harm is intended and you just weren't the best applicant or candidate, that rejection can sometimes be God's way of redirecting you to a path where you can set so many others free. And I think sometimes what we need to do in certain situations is when we are rejected, we take it to the Lord in prayer and we ask, okay, I was rejected from this. What are the next steps? In an ideal world, as we are presented with opportunities, but almost every single day when we awake, we ask of the Lord, Lord, what is your purpose and plan for me this day? Lord, I've gotten an opportunity. Before I even apply, is this something where you want me to be? Once we have this constant line of communication, and if you read Genesis 37 to 50, you'll see that Joseph and God were locked in. They were talking all the time, and God would express to him, I have a greater plan for you. But imagine if that rejection that he had experienced from his brother, if he just stayed angry and mad at God and not willing to talk to him, he would be unable to see what the greater purpose that God had for him was. He did not hold resentment for the rejection. Instead, he said, okay, God, what are the next steps? And scriptures that we can use to reassure us on this journey as I wrap up are, for example, Proverbs 14 verse 12. There's a way that appears right to us as a man, but it leads to death. This should be an anchor verse. This stresses the idea that we'll always have thoughts or plans or ambitions in our heart that seem right to us, but in reality, God has a greater plan. Unfortunately, we have these finite minds as humans, so we can't see the full scope of everything, okay? We're not omniscient, omnipresent, all-knowing. So we have to lean on the God who is to make the way clear for us. The way that looks right to us could be a way that leads to destruction from a God point of view. And we'll never have God's point of view, which is why we need to talk to him and ask him what that view is. Proverbs 16 verse 9 says, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. The idea that we ourselves have this idea or agenda or these dreams or ambitions that we want for our lives that sometimes are independent from what the Lord actually wants for us. God has an actual plan, a course for our steps, as it says here in Proverbs 16, that we have to tap in through prayer. We have to tap in through reading the word for God to illuminate to us and download into us the way that he wants us to walk. Yes, for sure. Sometimes there's opposition in the spirit that we have to pray against, but we have to use the discernment of the Lord to determine, okay, was this actually opposition from the devil? Do I need to pray even more and keep going to press forward for this? Is there a barrier in the spirit that needs to break? Or is it simply just God being like, no, that's not for you, I have greater? That all comes through constant communication and reading of his word. Think about the scripture that says he will do exceedingly abundantly above all we could ever ask, think, or imagine. If my God is going to do more for me than what I can ask, think, or imagine, I don't want my own plan. I don't want the things that I can ask, think, or imagine if he has more for me. So all in all, I hope if you get from this first sort of part of the idea of accepting rejection as God's redirection, the idea that we have to move in a place in which we can be mature enough to understand that rejection can sometimes be a form of redirection for the Lord. We have to detach ourselves from investing too early into things without seeking the Lord for his wisdom and guidance on what exactly these situations are. Not everything that glitters is gold. Not every door that's open you should go through, which is why we have to say the prayers, Lord, shut the doors that are not for me. And sometimes those doors are things you're attached to. Those are things that you're invested in. We say these prayers, Lord, please remove the people who are not of you from my life. And then it happens. And then we're sad, which I get because there's emotion attached to it. But at the end of the day, it's for our betterment. It is what the Lord wants for us. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you can learn something a little bit more about the importance of recognizing that sometimes rejection is God's protection and redirection for us. So the best way to do this is to stay prayed up, listening to what the Lord has to say, and also reading his words to illuminate the things that have characteristics that are of things that are of God versus things that are not of him. Knowing his word and listening to him and praying is the best way to understand what his purpose and plan is for your life. Because how you gonna know if you don't talk to him, girly pop? But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.